Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, where leadership meets entertainment. Today, we are delving into the complexities of leadership amidst the loss of a loved one. The potential of turmoil regarding family disputes over inheritance and heirlooms is high, believe me. We are going to provide jaw-dropping statistics surrounding the topic and the vital role of forgiveness.
Kristin, you triggered me, and I may have mentioned this. I didn't know when I was a deputy sheriff that one of our responsibilities was to go there when people were divvying up heirlooms. It was a nightmare. It was one of my least favorite things to do. And we also led funeral processions. So we're going to talk about both things today. My two exciting things.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is you and I have talked a lot about life and things in general, especially through the podcast, but off air as well. And that's something I didn't know about. I didn't know you had a part in that. So I can't wait to hear that from you.
This is the only thing I'm going to say, just to help people lighten up a little before this. I've used this before in training about stress. There was a time in my life when I was inundated with stress and I wasn't handling it well. And one time I'm in a line of traffic and I started realizing the car behind me had its lights on and it looked like taillights in the car in front of me. To make a long story short, someone passes me and I look over at them. They kind of nod their head in a respectful way. I realize I'm in a funeral procession and didn't even know it. I was probably listening to a book on tape. I was stressed out. So then you don't want to break out of the pack and pass people. It would seem disrespectful.
You went the full 8 miles. Or
so
however.
I did. I drove like 30 miles an hour. I was so mad at myself. And then finally, all the cars gave a signal and they're going up to the gravesite.
Oh my
so
goodness.
It's finally mine. I finally got out of it.
You are so nice.
Oh my God. Thank you, Lord. I couldn't do it. But in that moment, Kristin, I'm not joking you, something snapped and I'm like, I'm getting control of all this stuff. I'm going to drop some things. I've got too much going on. I prioritized and it all happened in a funeral procession.
That's so interesting. It must have slowed you down and forced you to really start processing thoughts.
Well, I said I'm going to be in my own. I'm going to be in that big long car behind me if I don't.
Hey, we have to reflect. Well, even if you're in line and it's not even for someone you know, or it was even your intention. Hey, you know what? Someone was telling you to slow down and think through things.
God, I'm having trouble pulling it back together when I think about the guy who looked at me like, sorry for your loss. He knew until his head.
You're like, what's happening?
I don't know who died, what I'm doing.
You're much nicer than I am because I actually ended up in one of those within the past few years. And I was like, oh no, it was on the freeway though. So I think it was easier for me to get out of.
No, this
so
was
I ended
freeway,
up just
go
getting,
ahead.
It was freeway and you kept going.
They're doing like 50.
I was like, see you later. And I was out. But well, it's very, very kind of you.
We could go, I'm going to stop. Anyway. All right. Before we get into this, further into this great topic, I want to mention that Forward Operations, our sponsor, is providing a coaching certification program. It's executive coaching. It's an opportunity if you want a side hustle and you want to help people. What's better than that? Mm-hmm. We've got a program for you. And I literally started working on this over a year ago, and you and I probably started talking about it a few months back, Kristin, but it is a phenomenal, and I'm not just saying this, but it covers everything from the right words to use, body language, face management, learning styles, personality styles. You are going to be so equipped to provide executive coaching when you finish this program. So if you're interested, please go to Forward Operations with the number 4, forwardoperations.com, and schedule a chat. I don't think you'll be disappointed.
Yeah, not at all.
All right.
It's an excellent opportunity.
Yeah, I do too. Back to our topic. People may wonder what leadership has to do with death, but the truth is someone in the family must step up and act as the leader in the heat of such circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
In my book, The Dirty Side of Leadership, as you know, Kristen, it's got 100 dirty lessons.
Yep.
DL21 says, in tragic situations, leaders must show up, exercise the power of presence. And people have no idea how much power there is in your presence.
Right.
And sometimes it's just sitting beside of someone, or just they know that you showed up and you came. Anyway.
Right. I have to just interject here because I know people that have, like, I had a dear friend who lost her husband to brain cancer. And I know people that went from hanging out with my friend every week to not seeing them the entire time he was battling cancer because it was, quote unquote, too hard. I didn't know how to act. And I think that is the biggest BS cop out. And though it's awkward for everybody in the in the circumstance, it's, you don't know how to act, but just being there, just showing up, being present, that speaks volumes, to your point. And if you're guilty of doing something like that, here's your wake up call that that's not kosher.
Kristen, I'm so glad you said that, and we will move on, folks, but let me vent on one other thing. I remember one time this was back in my police days, one of the deputies ended up very sick, had a leg removed, the whole thing, and he had to take dialysis. So it was literally on the highway that is a direct route to the sheriff's office. So the deputies drove by there, every single one of them had to. So I went in there and I'm sitting with him and I said, man, I bet you're getting loads of company because all the deputies drive through. And he told me, and he said it very sadly, he said, you're the only one that's kept up with me. I've heard from no one.
Wow.
I couldn't believe it. I just could not believe it.
That's unacceptable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Human nature is to be a puss, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And you have to push through that.
Yeah, no kidding. So, Kristen, this is the part where leadership meets entertainment, right? I mean, we're having fun.
Are you not entertained?
Yeah, good point. All right, a little bit of stats here. Did you know that there are 2.6 million deaths per year in the United States, resulting in 13 million grievers annually, averaging 5 grievers per death?
Wow.
Also, a person dies every 15.2 minutes each day. I have to go back to one thing, Kristen. There's only 5 grievers per death. Like, there's only going to be 5 people that's sad when I'm gone.
Well,
Anyway.
Here's where my mind went. I was thinking more along the lines of people who are going to need that bereavement time. So that's...
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, because most of the data that I was looking at is tying back to the workplace or the workforce in some respect. But yeah, those are generally going to be people that are going to need time off.
I see. Because I was going to do a PSA and try to hire some people that are listening, like they used to do in the Bible.
Can you fill up my funeral?
They used to do that. They seriously would hire grievers who would sit and mourn. They called them mourners.
Gosh.
And that's their job. Can you imagine? I got a new job today. I'm a mourner. Okay.
Oh, man. Hey.
Let's
hope we never have to hire folks like that. Oh, I guess it wouldn't be us, right? Unless we were really, really doing a great job.
No, I was letting you know, Kristen, so you could hire people. Like, I need you to do some social media posts.
I can show up for you.
Grievers needed.
Yep, on it.
Okay. Somewhere between 15 and 20% of those lose a loved one will experience complicated grief. In short, it's when men and women who lose a loved one cannot get past the pain and devastation. They may be suffering from a mental health condition known as complicated grief. If left untreated, the intense and persistent form of bereavement may continue indefinitely, possibly for years, putting sufferers at risk for many mental and physical health complications. And that's a very sad topic. But I know it happens all the time.
Oh, yeah, I know. Someone I went to high school with lost her dad, and I know it really took her over the edge, and future relationships didn't work out, and just a complete mess. Really sad to watch. So to make matters worse, 73% of consumers had outstanding debt when they died, and they carried an average total balance of $61,000. And that's including mortgage debt. I imagine if the age of the deceased is younger, that mortgage debt is going to be much higher. So 61,000 on average, which is still, that's a big number to pass on to your family. So generally speaking, debt belongs to the deceased person or that person's estate. But there are a lot of ways that things can get messy. So if, say, your only asset is a home that other people live in, that asset must be used to satisfy outstanding debts, whether it's the mortgage on that home or a credit card or any other type of debt, really. So meaning the people who live there may have to take over the mortgage, or your family may need to sell the home in order to pay the creditors. So accounts with co-signers, that's something I saw at the bank all the time. So if you are on an account with someone and there's any outstanding debt, the list goes on. You want to check with your bankers and your accounts on this. But what can happen is the debt can fall onto someone else's shoulders if that's not taken care of, if you don't do estate planning in advance. So community property states, where spouses share ownership of property, also handle debts acquired during a marriage a little differently. So many complexities that you want to, if you have the ability to do it now, do it so that you don't put an added, just a huge, heavy burden on your family after you pass.
So, Kristen, a quick banking question. You're saying someone passes, and if they didn't do estate planning, they've got nothing. Who actually, and let's say a family member wants that money, could you release that money, or if they're not a co-signer or a signator?
No, it has to go into probate.
That's what I
So,
thought.
yeah, and that's taxed, right, by the state, and it takes a long time, and you have to, generally speaking, you need to get an attorney. So you're hiring an attorney, paying for that, and then you have to go through probate, time consuming, costs money, and it's going to be taxed. So it's not a fun process.
This is a PSA, folks. Do those wills. Get that estate plan
Yeah,
for
the
sure.
estate, right. And the trusts are, they cost a little bit more to do, but trusts are a really great way to go. So work with your attorney on that.
I have a feeling you and I are on the same page, but I had this discussion with someone, and I was talking about the things I'm doing to leave my family something when I'm gone.
Right.
And this person said to me, I think that's bullcrap. They're adults, let them do their own. But I also realized this person doesn't have kids, and
Yeah.
your level of love changes.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I feel, and I'd love to hear if you're listening and you want to DM Kristen and I or send us a post, whatever. We'd love to hear from you. But what's your thoughts? Is it an obligation? Should you do everything in your power to leave an inheritance, or do you think you spend it and you go on and let the families do it for themselves? I'd love to hear what our listeners think about that topic.
Right.
And what's your thoughts, Kristen?
Yeah, for me, I want my kids to be in a better position than I was and so forth, right? And I know my parents have modeled that as well. My parents, middle class, working folks, they worked their way up into maybe middle upper, right? And they always wanted better for me. And I want better than what I had for my kids. And so I think, without breaking your back, leaving them in a position where they're going to be able to have a little bit of leeway and the ability to breathe financially. I think that is a great thing to do.
Yeah, I certainly don't want them to have to pay for all the mourners. So
can get really expensive per head.
All right. We're trying to make this, folks, we're not making light. Kristen and I talked before we signed on and said, this is a heavy topic. Let's make it light as we can.
Yeah. And that's just our personalities too. We're not, just going to be the frown family here. So
I do want mourners, but we're just making light.
You have to.
Grief is a deeply personal experience, and yet an emotion that inevitably spills out into our professional lives. So if you were looking for the nexus between leadership and death and crisis, there's the nexus. You can't separate the two. As leaders, it's crucial to cultivate a compassionate and understanding environment where we and our colleagues can navigate these tough moments together. And here's some ways to do that. Number one, we've already said you got to show up. If you're not there, you can't help. So I had a leader one time say to me, and I'm pretty assertive with this, Kristin. This person said, "I don't do funeral homes." Now, this is also the kind of person who thinks you're the great leader. And I literally said, any leader worth their weight is going to show up and go to that funeral home. This person ended up going, but I've had people say, I don't do hospitals. Don't ever say that. If you want to be a good leader, I mean, if you don't, that's fine. Stay home. But if you want to be an effective leader who's respected, you show up. You show up.
Right.
Number two, be authentic. It's okay to admit when you're struggling. And, you know, Kristin, I'm certified in crisis and stress management. And I tell everyone this. Most of the time, a grieving person will actually lead you. If they're not talking at all, it may be, if it's appropriate, you just sit there for a while, or put your hand on the shoulder. If it's someone you're close to and you know and understand that may mean more than any words that you can possibly speak. So don't stress out, just be authentic. And if you don't have words, and it's a close friend to say, you know, I don't know what to say. I'd watch The Sopranos, and I noticed every time they go to a funeral, they look at each other and they go, what are you going to do? It was an Italian thing. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
But it's okay. Like, you don't have to have all the answers. It's a death. There is no answer. You know, there's nothing you're going to say that's going to make people feel bubbly.
Yeah.
So
spot on.
Just keep that in mind. Show up, be authentic.
I have to interject, Ron, because is just too good not to share. So the whole I don't do hospitals thing, I've shared before that I'm a hypochondriac, but I'm getting better, but I'm on the spectrum, I would say, for hypochondria. But that said, I had this wonderful client at the bank, Jerry, and he was in the hospital. And I had heard that this is probably an end of life situation. So I went to the hospital to go visit him. And I've shared with Ron, I don't know if I've shared on the show, but I'm directionally challenged. So I found his room, which was great. We got a chat. He used to call me hot dog and had a great conversation. I was able to have that closure. And then I'm leaving and I got turned around and I ended up taking this door that led me down a flight of stairs. And then I went to turn around because I knew something. It seemed like I was going into a basement and I couldn't reopen the door, locked behind me. And I started freaking out. I was in the morgue, and thank Jesus, literally thank you, Jesus, because I was about to have like major nightmare situation. There was an employee that was coming up the stairs and I was like, they looked surprised to see me. I'm like, I went down the wrong door and I'm locked in here now. And they opened it up for me. So I was only like 2 minutes. Terrifying.
I would have put my hands out and said, anyway.
It was so scary. But I showed up for Jerry and we had that great conversation, even though I almost ended up in the morgue I don't know. I could have been locked down there for hours, days. I don't know. But
imagine the difference in that feeling if you'd never went. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
People have to look at the end result, and sometimes it can be a little bit selfish. Like, you know, intrinsically, you're going to feel so much better that you did. I felt pretty proud when my buddy said, "You're the only cop that's shown up here." I did feel a sense of pride, and I also felt like those other guys were bastards.
Exactly.
So anyway,
yeah.
Just quickly, number 3, seek support. That's the time. If you've not checked into the employee assistance program, it might be a good time because they do have some good materials. You might need to get counseling or refer someone for counseling. Talk to trusted colleagues, your minister. There's 2 things you're navigating. You got to navigate your own stress level and your own emotions, but you also have to be there for your colleagues. And if you're a manager, you got to be there for your employees. But no one's a superhero. It's okay to get help and lean on whatever the company has to offer.
Yeah.
And also, number 4, set boundaries. And I just said that you're responsible for your own emotions. You can't carry the weight of the world. And I do know that if you're grieving, like I remember a situation where a colleague died. So not only was the group grieving, the managers grieve too. They're not impervious to that. So it's a difficult time for everyone. So you may need some space for a brief period of time. Don't go in hiding, but take some space, step away, get yourself composed, and then do what you need to do.
Right, right. I have to say, one of my dear friends and colleagues, he worked on a team where someone, I think the banker at the location, he was there one day, was in a car accident that night, never returned. And it was just such a shocking, especially when it's something very sudden like that. And the kid was in his 20s. But to have somebody there every day and then they get in a car accident and die, that whole team experienced grief. And I watched my friend who's very stoic and generally doesn't display a lot of emotions, and he was in shock. It almost seemed like more of a shock, like it was such an odd feeling, and that is very normal, and people go through that, and that's okay.
Kristin, without being too detailed, and I know that our listeners, there's many of you have lost a loved one, you've lost a colleague, and you know exactly what we're talking about, that all of that plethora of emotions that comes along with that. It's difficult, but I was over our national wellness committee. So when there was a suicide, I was the one that would reach out to the head executive throughout the country. And that's such a difficult conversation because they're in the middle of, trying, they're responsible for notifying families, and there's so much to it. But I remember one instance, I'm going to be a little vague, but basically what had happened is there was suicide, and employees began to build a shrine to this person's office. So the head executive was really at a loss. Like, at what point do you clean out this office and take down the shrine?
Right.
And it turns out when this person did that, it was probably 2 weeks later, there were some employees who were insulted and felt it was too soon. Others wanted it down, like, this is depressing. So those are the complications we're talking about. There's never a straight line from point A to point B. There's decisions that you have to make, and sometimes there's wisdom and counsel. You might need to seek some other people and figure this out. But there's nothing in a book that says if employees are building this shrine, when do you take it down?
I know. The book of Kristin says 30 days.
30?
I don't know. What is the book? That's my gut, is like, let it ride for 30 days. Let the team know the plan. In 30 days, I do plan on, right? Communicate that, gather feedback.
I think you and I usually agree, and you're probably right. I'm going to admit that. But I think for this person, the 2 weeks was appropriate because some people were getting uncomfortable. But you said the key thing is you communicate, and this didn't happen, but I'm saying it's something you could do, because I'm not saying I would know this at that time, but you could say, like, have one final little something outside the door. And say, after that, I would like some volunteers to help, because they did it after hours. And I get it. I'm not passing judgment on anyone, because I don't know what I would have done.
Right.
But when you got employees that are uncomfortable, I'm not
that
sure
is something you have to take into consideration.
It's tough.
Right. Yeah.
Are you going to take these, Kristin, next?
Yeah, I can jump into this. Yeah. So supporting colleagues experiencing grief, kind of like what I just mentioned with my friend whose teammate was just suddenly gone. But you want to listen actively. And sometimes the most significant support is simply being there. This is a trend. You heard us saying this earlier, but it's so true. Be there, listen. Don't become completely absent, right? Because it makes you uncomfortable. You want to show up. So, like I did with the leader I was coaching, allow the time and space to express their feelings without judgment or the urge to offer immediate solutions. Remember, it's not about fixing their pain, but providing a safe space to share it.
That's right. Let me take this next one on because I've dealt with this. It's number 2 is offer flexibility. And I was pleasantly surprised the government was pretty flexible in situations like that, or at least gave me the latitude to be flexible with employees. But this is a time when, for example, there's some people, some managers that don't get it. They're like, okay, they think they're being a hero. You can have 3 days off because, your spouse died or whatever. And they think they're
Wow.
being heroic.
Mm-hmm.
This is an individualized thing. I get it. The company can't shut down. I do get that. But grief is individualized. You
Mm-hmm.
can't just group and do a policy. You get 3 days depending on who died. If it's Uncle Bob, you only get a day. Um, it's really interesting, but I think intuitive managers realize that, and you're gauging the progress and the things that we've talked about. But be as flexible as possible.
Right.
You don't know how someone's grieving. You can't walk in their shoes, really.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. It was interesting because I know a lot of places, if it's not an immediate family member, I believe like kind of as a collective, the banks I worked at offered about 2 weeks if it was an immediate family member, and which I think is pretty appropriate. And then you can always use vacation time, et cetera, to add on to that, or potential leave of absence, depending on what you have going on.
Right, right.
That said, I've had in an instance, I had somebody come back after a few days because it was not an immediate family member. And you could tell it was much too soon. Like they were pretty much nonverbal, but working with customers, right? And so at that point, as a leader, I had to, step in and say, look, I think you need more time and have that conversation. And so it's not always easy because he wasn't coming to me asking for more
Right.
time. It was me having to point that out, that I think it was too soon. But I think as a leader, you have to gauge that not only for the benefit of the employee, but the team and your customers and clients as well.
And Kristen, I want to note we're using death, but this could be other crises. You can use the same
Mm-hmm.
things in this podcast for another crisis. And
Yeah.
the next one, I wanted to touch on that because I've developed something that's being used. I'm very proud of this. It's being used throughout the United States, especially in government. Check in regularly, and I developed. It's a 4-level process of what a check in really is. And level 1 is surface talk, I call it. So it's like, hey, Kristen, how are you doing? And chances are you're going to say fine whether you are or not.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
I call it P2P, and that's permission to pry.
Mm,
And do you mind if I, ask how you're doing, or do you mind if I
right.
ask, are you sleeping now? Those are some things you need to get to. By the way, in the crisis stress management, you look at the fundamental things first. Are you sleeping? Are you eating? Are you
Right.
hydrating? Because
Yeah.
if none of those are happening, this person is going to spiral out of control.
Yeah.
So try to get a little collective permission to pry. Now, if it's someone really close to you, you may not need to do that, but it's something
Right.
that's really helped and worked with people. We've already talked
Yeah.
about the other parts of, not necessarily having a timeline, but the key is checking in. This is something I always do, Kristen, and I hope this helps our listeners. As a matter of fact, I had extended death in the family. My brother-in-law by marriage, his mother passed this week. So
Oh,
what I
sorry.
do is about after 2 weeks, all the food's gone, people are not bringing meals
Mm-hmm.
anymore, it gets quiet. And
Right.
there's that 2 to 3, 4 week period that maybe everyone's back to their normal lives. That is a great time to check on someone.
Yes.
And they've had time to, decompress, but also go through the steps of grief. And if you're looking for the right time, that's definitely one of them.
Right, right. No, that it's so smart. I think we've touched on that before, but it's so true. Everyone that I know that's experienced something like that, it's 2 weeks and then crickets,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that can be some of the hardest times for sure. Okay. Well, in our intro, I touched on forgiveness. And this is something that I live by. So I'm really excited that we get to dive into it. So I want to share how to cultivate forgiveness in your life. And I want to be transparent. I forgive, but I don't forget. And there is a big difference. It's important to remember what somebody is capable of and how it can impact those around them. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Ron. They say forgive and forget. I'm sorry. I'm not going to forget when I've been wronged. I will forgive, but I will always remember so that I know how to protect myself and my family in the future. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Number one, I think it's impossible. We're human beings.
Right, right.
Um, the reason people say that, they say if you're still thinking about it, you've not really forgiven. I don't
Mm,
believe that's true. But
yeah.
what's the old? Since we did rock and roll bands last week, once bitten, twice shy. Um,
Mm,
there, once trust has been broken. In other words, let's say you let someone borrow money and they never paid you back. You forgive them, but you're probably not going to loan them money again. If
right.
if so, that's the point. Is you learn from these things. So yeah, I
Yes.
agree with you, Kristen.
Yeah, no, it's important. And yeah, some people will judge and say, like you said, if you haven't forgotten, you're still hung up on it. But I don't think that's true at all. And also, forgiveness doesn't mean you have to become best friends, right? And it can be all too easy to hold on to grudges, resentments, and past grievances. But as leaders, we must recognize the transformative power of forgiveness in healing wounds and restoring harmony. Can't say that enough. Forgiveness isn't just about letting go of the past, it's freeing ourselves from the burden of anger and resentment and allowing us to move forward with clarity and compassion.
Well said, Kristen. And
Thank
it's
you.
not just about forgiving others. This is something I've struggled with. It's about forgiving ourselves. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people, especially, in my church background, I've talked to a lot of people who, when I was younger, I saw God as this, he looked like Zeus. The pictures you see of
Yeah.
Zeus, the long beard. I thought he
Right.
had big muscles. And every little thing I did, he was disappointed. And it's
Mm,
hard to shake that. But we have to learn to forgive ourselves. We ask
right.
God for forgiveness. We need to forgive ourselves. And we have to understand that we make mistakes. We're
Yeah.
imperfect, and you're going to make more mistakes. But I really do, Kristen. When I hear people say I wouldn't change a thing, I think, wow, either they're perfect or they just haven't done any introspection, because there are a lot of things in my past, especially as a leader manager, that I would change, that I would have done differently. So
Right. Absolutely.
anyway,
Same.
I'm
Yeah.
only gonna go through these briefly. You interject if you
Yeah,
want,
well, I
Kristen.
just want to say, we've all heard of Catholic guilt. My dad grew up Catholic. He converted to Christianity in his 30s, but oh my gosh, I still see him. Like if he breaks something, he's a fix-it man and he tries to help me around the house. And when he accidentally like breaks something, he feels I see him like reverting back to this 13-year-old Catholic boy
Yeah.
who feels the shame of what did you do? You're worthless. You failure, right? I see it and it's so sad to me. And I do feel like a lot of that, it can be from like that Catholic guilt. And it's not just Catholicism. Like you're saying, you grew up, what was your denomination growing up?
Well, I grew up when I was real young. I grew up in a Pentecostal church,
Mm,
then charismatic, which is, I mean, a lot of the belief
yeah,
systems are the same, but the
right,
the atmosphere was different. I grew up.
right.
I was so afraid of the pastor. I would hide behind my
Mm,
mother when he would
wow,
when he would walk out when I was real small. Now, I went to a great church later in life, and I attend a great
right.
church now, but it was fundamentalist. I was in the coal
Mm-hmm,
fields, and yeah, it was some
right.
situations that were scary.
Yeah, and that impacts us. Look at my dad, 65, or excuse me, 75, and he's still still I can see it on his face sometimes. So it's really powerful when we
Yeah,
hold on to
I'm
it.
in no way disrespecting Catholicism. I just had a friend. It was just funny. He would tell me, because we didn't understand confession when I was younger.
Mm.
So he would tell me that he would change up the order of his sins. He would commit the same sins over and over, but he would mix up the order, so hoping the
Oh my
priest wouldn't
gosh.
remember. Then he started dating a girl and they're having sex, right? And she's devout. So he's trying to get her not to tell the priest. So he's in this dilemma. He wanted to lie, but he said he didn't want the priest to think somebody else was sleeping with his girlfriend.
Oh my
And
gosh.
here's the funny part. He called fornication fornicated. So he said, I would go into the priest and go, I lied. I was rude to my parents and I fornicated. He said, then next week I'd start off with fornicated. And anyway, I was cracking up. He didn't realize.
Oh
I
my
never
gosh.
corrected him on fornicated. It was too much fun
You're
to
like,
hear him
just let
say it.
it. Yeah, hey, that's one of
If you're
those.
listening, don't be fornicating. Okay.
I just see like a boggle. Have you ever played Boggle and you like mix all the little letters up? I just see that. And that's like his sins bouncing up and landing in different places. Oh
He
my
really thought the
goodness.
priest was going to forget if he mixed the order up.
That's hilarious. I
Yeah.
love it.
Just quickly, 8 steps to true forgiveness from a biblical standpoint. Oh, this is easier. I know this. If you're listening, we get it. It's easier when you hear this stuff, but it's not so easy to apply to your life.
Right.
But you have to start somewhere. So the first thing is if someone has wronged you, acknowledge the pain. It's okay. You're a human being. And think it through. I always say there's a primary and secondary response. Your primary response is to choke them to death.
Yeah.
Your secondary response will be a little lighter than that. Try to look at different perspectives. Try to look at their side. I know that's difficult. Remember God's forgiveness to everyone. Reflect on that biblical command. And by the way, I don't think there's anything more powerful. I don't think there's a more powerful word in the dictionary than forgiveness. We have, what it really means is, Kristin, this is deep. You have a forearm, which is the first part of your arm, right? For means before, and you're giving forgiveness.
Wow.
So really, you should walk in forgiveness. In other words, I've already forgiven everyone.
Wow. That is profound.
It's pretty profound. And that's the Christ type of forgiveness there that's talking about.
Right.
And then you got to work through the hurt. You got to let go of the hurt. And I'm going to add one here that I've seen happen. Don't build your team. Don't go around talking to everybody. Because when I said I have regrets, I did that before in my past. In other words, I'm mad at that person, so I tell the friends to make them look bad. And I never felt good about that. But you want to build your team against their team, and you assume they're telling their team. You know how that works.
Right.
So try to let go of the hurt and just continue to forgive. Think about it. I'm giving ahead of time.
Yeah.
And I saw this in a sermon one time, and it was so profound. Is this person stood on the stage and had someone come up as a volunteer, and that's the person that had wronged them. And then they had another person that was symbolic of God. So ordinarily, you want God to strike that person. I want you to take them down, God. But this person stepped in the middle, turned around and faced God and says, don't hold this to their account, what they did to me. That was so powerful that you're interceding, you're standing in the gap between you and that person that's hurt you and speaking to God on their behalf. If you get to that point, you can pray for the person that hurt you. Trust me, you are really growing emotionally, spiritually, in all facets of your life. So anyway, there's some of you that got left out of an inheritance. People did you wrong during a tragic situation. Start to work on forgiveness. My sister always says, and I know she read it somewhere, it's like you drinking poison hoping it's going to affect the other person or something like that. You're only hurting yourself when you're harboring those that ill will and those bad feelings.
So
and
true.
this is the same at work, by the way. It's the same thing at work.
Yeah. That's big. I like that, what your sister says. That means a lot. So, we really need to let go of this need to be right and instead prioritize reconciliation and understanding. We create space for healing and growth when we do that. And let's not forget the importance of empathy throughout all of this. Putting ourselves in the shoes of others, even those we may disagree with. I live in the Pacific Northwest. I agree with the vast majority of folks that live here. And I have to look for that common ground regularly and put myself in their shoes to try to understand thought process.
Yeah.
When you do that, you can foster greater compassion and empathy, which really paves the way for forgiveness and reconciliation.
Yeah, and Kristin, when I teach permission to pry, I also teach something called conversational threading. And there are ways to get people talking if you thread a conversation. Like if I ask you, Kristin, where did you grow up? You might just say one word or the state you grew up in. But if I said, what did you like about growing up there? I'm threading a conversation.
I
You
like
could do
it.
the same thing in crisis. You could say something to the effect of, I know you all were cleaning out your grandfather's estate. How did that go? Uh, and a lot of times that will thread a conversation. But if you just say, do you need anything? People's response sometimes will be, no, I'm okay. But
Right.
you might say, hey, has anyone brought food lately? Could we go to lunch, or could I bring some food? Something, be specific. You want to be
Right.
open-ended questions that thread a conversation, but you may have to narrow that down and be very specific. As I said, when
Right.
you're saying, are you sleeping? Um,
Yeah.
how's
I
things?
can see how powerful that would be.
It is. It's very powerful, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It gets people talking. So you mentioned, basically how my mom, my aunt and I've mentioned this on previous podcasts since coming back, but my grandfather passed away on New Year's Day. And my mom, my aunt and we went to Texas to clean out his estate. And he hadn't done any estate planning. Hence maybe why I wanted to put this episode together because it hasn't been the easiest of circumstances. But he didn't do any planning, and his late wife, who's not my grandma, it would be my step grandma, she had passed years earlier, didn't do any of her estate planning either. So it was a big job. But I would say, when I think back on going there, we were showing up for him, and something, he was a jerk at times, right? Not to me, but to his wife, my grandma, and to my aunts and my uncle. He wasn't the best father or husband, and he could just be a jerk sometimes. But I think, what we all did as we were able to really look past that and show up for him. And when we did that, we met his neighbors and people from his church community and friends he had made there. And nobody had, outside of saying he was really thick-headed and opinionated, which we all know, I am too. Nobody had an ill word to say about him. And he had developed this great community and all these great relationships. So much so that when I came home, I landed on a church. I had been kind of church shopping. I landed on a church, and I've already gotten signed up to help out with the women's ministry because I want that sense of community that my grandpa built for himself. And it was just so profound. So it's been such an impactful time. And not only just to see the life he had created for himself there, but also to be able to go through, we had to work through the forgiveness because he wasn't perfect. But we were going through his belongings and showed him dignity and respect. And it was just this huge healing process. And I really feel like, amidst the grief and the tension, forgiveness emerged as a guiding principle. And we had to let go of our individual desires or grievances to honor my grandfather's memory and preserve the family unity.
That's powerful. Thanks for sharing that. And
Of
Kristin,
course.
I, along with I'm sure many of our listeners, kind of followed your journey on social media. And I did see you leading the celebration of life, or I saw a picture of you with the microphone. And I thought it was, number one, ironic. A month before, I was doing the same thing with my uncle and
Right.
aunt when I went home to Virginia. And then I saw you doing it. But I know I gave you a hard time, but I knew you were leading. I knew you were taking charge there and making everything happen. And you had told me offline that, that your grandfather, there's that no one ever talks about. Thank God, at
Yeah.
funerals we say the best things, but there are
Right.
situations where you've been hurt, and this person
Right.
actually was the perpetrator of the hurt. And so that's all complex as well, and all those family dynamics. But yeah, I'm
Right.
glad you were there. I'm glad you made it through that. And if you are listening and you're going through something like this, please listen carefully to this episode and get the steps to keep yourself well, but also your colleagues, your managers. This is so important. This may not be the most exciting podcast that we've done, but gosh, it's so important. And
Yeah.
no matter who we are, one day we're all going to cross that bridge.
Right.
We're
And
going to have
that's
to
just
deal with
it, Ron.
something.
It's like death is going to touch everybody, whether we like it or not. It's going to touch all of us. So it's something that we need to be able to talk about and learn from in advance.
Yeah, and if you'd like to volunteer to be a mourner, please DM me.
Ron,
No,
create a
DM
sign-up
Kristin,
list.
because she's.
He wants me to put it together. That's true. You won't be around.
I
So
need
yeah.
you.
Okay.
I need you to put that part together, Kristin.
Oh my goodness
So,
gracious. Well, forgiveness isn't always easy. I'll end it at this, but it is necessary for healing and moving forward. And in the context of leadership, it's an invaluable tool for fostering trust, collaboration, and resilience within our teams and families. So if you can take anything away, there is that, and it's powerful.
I don't think I can add anything to that, Kristin. That was powerful. All right, everybody, we appreciate you. Please like, follow, subscribe, rate, all of those things. We need your help to keep this thing going, and we are certainly grateful. Be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.